Guys, we have an exciting day here. We have Luke and Carter from S&S Diesel Motorsport, father and son actually, so it fits perfectly here for our shop and this environment. If you know our last video that we just did about high pressure fuel pump issues, we're now going to dive into injectors and kind of that world. Carter, as far as I'm aware, is the expert here
he's one of the injector gurus for sure. So
I like that, the injector guru. So we're really excited to have them to dive into this, because we have a lot of people asking us, what do you do differently? Why is there a benefit here? And so let's dive into it.
One of our most popular products is for the LB7 platform, so the early generation Duramax. Those had early life failures. They tended to, 50,000, maybe 100,000 miles. They'd start hazing, and start having fuel in the exhaust and all that kind of thing. And guys would have to, injector jobs on those aren't fun either because they're buried under the valve cover. And
I love Duramaxes, but man, to do injectors on them is a nightmare.
They're hard to work on for sure.
Yes.
So years ago, we designed a better nozzle for the LB7 that was a long life nozzle. The guts of that basically comes down to at a microscopic level at the tip of these injectors. So
this is an original LB7 injector.
It's hard to tell, and there's a needle inside of these. So what happens is this needle's moving up and down like that. You have full pressure inside of this nozzle all the time. That's the 20, 30,000 PSI, but it's sealing down here, and that's what keeps it from going in the cylinder. And when it's commanded to inject it, it sprays out a predefined, amount of fuel out of these tiny little microscopic spray holes. This is a super zoomed in version of that. This is that nozzle cutaway basically. Needle is here. That's actually a spray hole. When we did a cutaway, ground it down until we actually hit a spray hole so you can see how the fuel exits through the nozzle out into the cylinder. The problem with this setup is it is a VCO nozzle, valve covering orifice. That's what that stands for, but it's basically sealing on the spray holes right here.
I mean, how many injectors does Cummins do that? How many people do that?
The early the 5.9, so the 03 to 07s had this style nozzle. And the LB7 Duramax had this style nozzle. Everything after that went to a more modern, what they call sack type nozzle. And that seats differently, but same deal. It's a needle down into the nozzle bore, and that's moving up and down extremely fast and extremely precise, and it seals down here in the bottom. But the difference is that on the sack types, here's the spray holes. Instead of sealing right on them, it seals at a little bit higher diameter up here. So in this type, the factory setup, if you get any kind of wear, a little bit of erosion, anything right here, it starts to allow a little bit of leakage for the fuel to dribble into the cylinder. When it's supposed to be closed, you're actually getting extra fuel in here.
And that will cause white smoke,
unburned hydrocarbons, which is the white smoke, which is the hazing, and some uncontrolled fuel basically. So what we did was we took the more modern style nozzle, which was a sack type, and designed it to match the combustion recipe of the original one. So the same spray angle, the same hole count, the same flow rate. So we build them to match the output of the original injector too. You got to do other modifications in the injector to make them be a straight drop in, where the truck doesn't know any different. You don't have to tune for it and all that kind of thing.
Wow.
But that basically makes it where you have the best of both worlds. The original recipe, but with a more modern nozzle. We designed this and actually worked with Bosch, and Bosch manufactures the nozzles for us.
Really?
So that, you can't, there's a lot of aftermarket nozzles, different places in Europe and other things like that. You don't really know the quality of it, but there again, kind of our style is get the best design with the best manufacturing, and that's where we ended up with, the good Bosch manufacturing processes, but with the modern design.
How many injectors are you building in a week or so?
For me, I do more of the custom, big race build stuff, so I'm doing maybe 10, 15 sets a week.
Really?
And get a bunch of guys, send their injectors in for repair or test, and we'll do that as well. But Justin, the guy that does all the SACU stuff, he builds 20 sets a week maybe.
Really?
He's doing batches of hundreds of them.
Just LB7 injectors, and then all of the other smaller street truck stuff would be, he also takes care of that too. So
wow,
there's a lot of injectors going through.
That's a ton.
Yeah, Carter ends up with all the science project stuff usually. Yeah. He's running a different style bench that can collect a lot of really precise data and all that. So we do a decent amount of engineering consulting work too for some OEs and stuff, and usually Carter's running that data collection and those injectors. Or when we're heading to Bonneville later today with some of our race car projects out there, a lot of the race car builds are all what Carter did for them. So.
Really? Wow. So you're the guy that's behind the injection portion of making these things go fast.
Yeah. Yep.
That's fascinating. That's cool. So
the nice thing about doing these in big batches too is there's like a certain tolerance on the injectors. Like you buy any new injector or whatever, right? It's going to be plus or minus a certain amount of fuel output. Which if that gets kind of loose, you end up with cylinder to cylinder imbalance, or it might idle rough, or you could actually hurt an engine if you've got one cylinder fueling more than another.
Right.
But we hold these to a really tight band, a really tight allowable tolerance, and so the whole group is within a tighter than even Bosch production tolerance. And then what we do is we might build, say, 240 of these at a time or something, and really then we cherry pick. You know, the whole group is within these goalposts, which is already plenty good. But we take those and cherry pick the ones that are the closest together to the closest together, and we grab batches for a set, you know.
So is that essentially, if I got that right, like the IQA number, that stands for like injector quality adjustment?
Injection quantity adjustment.
Quantity adjustment, okay. So, I mean, how necessary, if you're dialing that batch into a certain tolerance, how necessary is it to program that IQA number? Is it still like...
The LB7s don't have that, but some of the newer generations do. So the requirements for both emissions and guys expecting the trucks to be extremely quiet and extremely refined. You know, the trucks nowadays, you can't really tell they're diesels anymore.
Right.
They're so quiet, refined, and powerful. It's wild, honestly. Like, it's super impressive. You can have 500 horsepower, and it's just the most refined, you know, piece of machinery. But some of that plus emissions requirements made it where the injectors had to be like spot on times thousands of them. It's hard to manufacture something by the thousands that's going to be exactly the same. So that's where the IQA codes kind of came in, was, all right, we'll let the injectors drift a little bit, but we have the data to know whether it's a high flyer or a low flyer, and then we'll program in a code that the ECU and the truck trims that one up or down a little bit to kind of square them all up. So on the older trucks, they didn't have that though. So you're just based on what the injector itself does versus all of its brothers in that engine, you know, or the hundreds of the batches or whatever. But that's where we kind of cherry pick out of a batch that's already tight, and then make groupings of engine sets that are right on top of each other. So when you buy a LB7 SAC 0 injector from us, you get a data sheet with it, which is almost unheard of in the aftermarket. You just get, you buy
you open
a part
a box
number and you're like, I hope these are the right thing. You get a data sheet with the serial numbers of your particular injectors that says exactly how they performed, and they're usually dead nuts right on top of each other. So
that's one of we hate that installing any part, but we hate installing an injector, just kind of doing this and hoping that we get something that works, because we've had injectors that we get right out of the box, not your injectors, but we get some that we've gotten out of the box, we put them in, and we've got a misfire, or we got smoke or something, and it's like, great, now we got to go back in and just deal with an injector.
It's extra difficult then, right? Because you're like, well, we got brand new injectors, it can't be them. So you start chasing down all these other paths and wondering what it could be, and eventually circle back around to, well, I don't know, maybe it's the injectors. So that's why we try to, there's so many flavors of injector, from brand new Bosch to reman Bosch to other kind of maybe Bosch certified remans to homegrown unknown remans to refurbs that are basically like tested cores. And it's hard for the customers to know what they're getting, because they just know, I need an LB7 injector. Well, here's your range of what you can get from quality. And so we only operate in the either brand new Bosch based injector or reman Bosch based injector, which is the best you can possibly get with the best possible nozzle, with a test sheet that says, here's how these exact injectors performed when they left our facility. That way customers or shops that don't want to deal with comebacks, you know, they say, hey, all right, I just want stuff that I can trust. And that's what we really, you know, are striving for.
That's awesome. And these are pictures of...
So this video is of a microscope at our shop. This is a micro EDM wire, basically. So that would be, I don't know, how many thousandths is that wire? About 6 thou. So that little wire that I'm going to move the needle with in the video, that gives you an idea of scale. That's about a 6,000th of an inch wire. versus the spray hole where the fuel actually enters the cylinder. There's no room for error in any of this stuff. The clearances and tolerances and all of this are incredibly tight.
And this is in the VCO.
This is in the VCO where you can see there's the other spray holes there actually.
Oh, okay. Those other little holes.
Yep.
There.
So this is what it's doing while it's running. And then you can see there's not much area for that thing to seal on that hole. If it wears in at all, which you'd kind of expect at some point, it would.
Right.
It's hitting it like millions or billions of times. If it seats in at all, you end up into this area right here where it's not even going to seal very well.
So, how often does the tip of a nozzle just break off? What's
Rarely.
the cause of that?
Typically overheat, combustion leakage, which turns into overheat. This is called the copper washer, the combustion seal. There's a few different names for it. This seals into the cylinder head,
right.
And all the combustion, all the fury, all the violence is happening right here, right? And that's just seating right there like that. So all of the heat and the pressure from the engine running is right there. That seal into the head is what keeps that from cooking up the side of this. Well, what you'll see sometimes, if you got a whole bunch of carbon packed up into the side of this, or guys have a hard time getting injectors out, a lot of times it's because you had leakage past this combustion seal. And so you end up with cylinder combustion leakage up into here. Well, this relies on that seal and the cooling through the head, the coolant flowing through the head to actually cool the nozzle. And so what you end up doing is overheating up the side of the injector. And then this gets hot and soft, and you can either crack the nozzle or blow the tip off.
We've seen some, I can't remember if it was on a Duramax or a Power Stroke, where this actually starts to concave in.
Yep.
And it's eroding away.
And
is that the same thing?
Different in that case,
okay.
Because that's a combustion recipe thing. Something about the 6.7 Power Stroke combustion recipe erodes away at the nozzle right where you were talking about, because that does happen. Carter sees that quite a bit. Justin sees that, some of the guys in the shop, because our test benches seal around the nozzle, and so sometimes we can't even test an injector because the diameter has eroded away so far it won't even seal anymore. And so you end up with it eroding at this metal surface. I don't know, I try not to BS anybody. I don't know exactly what's going on with it, but I think it's related to their combustion recipe of how much EGR they're using, how cool the combustion is. My years at Cummins, we ran into some issues on engines running off the west coast of Africa with really high sulfur fuel that we thought and they would idle all the time. It was in big boats, they'd be idling, and they'd have really cold combustion, so it wasn't hot enough to really burn everything. So they were essentially creating sulfuric acid because of the sulfur in the fuel, and the cool combustion would make sulfuric acid and start to pit and eat away at things. So it could be something like that happening on the Power Stroke, because we don't really see it on any other platforms. Have you seen it on anything other than Fords?
No, I've only ever seen it on Fords.
Okay.
Eat away like that.
Yeah. And it gets really, really thin. It seems to be related maybe to light load stuff, but that'd be a good question for viewers, is if you see that, does that truck tend to be a heavy haul, high load, hot shot guy, or is that a kind of grocery getter, lots of light load and cool combustion kind of thing, a lot of idle time? Because it's related to the duty cycle and the combustion recipe. So mysteries like that are odd for sure, but it doesn't really happen on the rest of them.
So this is where, and Luke is asking everybody, and so I'll reiterate it. We have such a cool community. This is partial to why I love the diesel world, is people are so helpful and enthusiastic about their trucks and their diesel that if anybody else has seen that out there on your Fords, let us know what circumstances, because this data helps everybody in this community. And so pitch in, hit us up in the comments, because that's super. I mean, we want that feedback.
You might be able to help somebody prevent issues of, hey, don't maybe it's a lot of idle time is what does it, or something like that, so don't leave your truck running for hours and hours on end, shut it off.
So what's your guys' from an expert side where you see this world, what's your advice for everybody out there to maintain their fuel system? I know we talked about the pumps in that in the previous video, but just in diesel maintenance in general, what do you say is a must do?
Keep the fuel clean. Really.
Yeah.
Any tiniest little piece of debris will can ruin an injector. It can hang it open, so just spraying fuel all the time can hurt an engine even with that. So as long as you're clean, they seem to hold together pretty good.
People harp fuel quality all the time, and it's kind of just like beating a dead horse, but it is the reality of it is the injectors and the pump is really the lifeblood of modern diesels and what makes it where you can have a 500 horse truck that is just super refined. So, but to do that, it's all these really tight clearances and super high pressures and everything else. So, like you said, if good quality fuel, good filtration, and if you ever have the system apart, very conscious to not leave ports open, not get debris in it. Like a common rail fuel system is a whole different animal than any other system, really. Just not tolerant to that. So if you're replacing injectors, make sure that all the ports are covered up when you're done with it. Make sure that you're cleaning lines, make sure that all that kind of stuff is very clean, taken care of very well, because a piece of debris that you can't even hardly see with your naked eye can get caught in a certain orifice of the injector, like Carter said, makes that injector overfuel. Makes them slow to close, which can actually ruin an engine.
A lot of our guys, we tell them even if they're doing, valve cover gaskets or something like that, it's like if you got a disaster and an oily mess and it's grimy, clean it off. Like you don't need to be a grease monkey in the sense of just getting dirty just because you think it's cool. I mean, staying clean is important. So what about fuel filter life? Would you say we're big on people about changing that oil filter for engine life often, like stretching it to, sometimes these manufacturers are saying 15 to 20,000 miles on an oil change. We just think that's trash. What about fuel filters? So what would you say should be the life there?
Fuel filters are a little different than engine because you're not recirculating the same fluid. That's one thing that it's kind of, I didn't even think about till maybe in the last year or so, right? Is even from a warranty perspective, it's really easy for Ford or for anybody to deny warranty on a fuel system because that's the only system in the engine or vehicle that you put a outside foreign fluid in. The transmission's sealed up, recirculated, whatever the engine is, the cooling system is, fuel system, brake, you're getting, so it's easy to say, hey, that you got water in your fuel, you got contaminants in your fuel, and we see that often, whether it's legit or not. It's super easy to deny warranty on a fuel system. But
interesting.
So good filters is really one of the keys, and it's really difficult now because there's so many Chinese knockoffs on filters now.
Crazy.
Like used to be you could order stuff online and kind of feel probably okay with it. Now, I've just tested my own just for out of curiosity. I'll order filters. The Ford Motorcraft part number filter on Amazon or whatever else comes in a Motorcraft box. Is pretty much an identical clone. There's just really subtle little differences, and you don't know what's inside of that thing. And so
you see the big red Motorcraft and you think,
you assume
good
it's
to go.
Legit. So like in the cases of fuel filters now, buying them from a dealer is probably about the safest option. Like
really,
the knockoff market is so infiltrated and so out of control that otherwise I don't know how you'd even know what you're getting.
That's crazy.
They just build clones of it. And we've had, actually, our disaster prevention kit for the Fords is a very popular product. And so there's cheap knockoffs and Chinese import stuff where they are trying to clone ours. They even use our instructions and they use our everything, basically. And they'll have a knockoff filter that looks like a proper Donaldson filter like we use, but the print on it's not quite right. You can tell it's just a fraud. And I did a video once comparing, hey, what do you get with our $400 kit or one of these knockoff $300 kits or $200 kits or whatever, and cut one of those filters apart to see what was in it. And it didn't even have a top seal. So there was like the filter was bypassing some amount of it. So that kind of stuff could be taking systems down, whether it's CP4s or whatever else. If the inside of that filter canister is junk or it doesn't even have proper seals to keep the clean side from the dirty side, I don't even know like what, you wouldn't know it. Next thing you know, you got injectors hung open or your pump failed and I always get good clean fuel at the same station or whatever people say that, but don't skimp on filters. And even on, I'm not as much on changing them at like super often because technically the filters almost get better over time to some degree because they start to get all the bigger holes in the filter get blocked by the debris it caught. So they almost actually get finer and finer filtration over time as they start to get a little bit plugged. Not so bad that you create a restriction, but But yeah, good filters from a known source, and even if it says whatever the brand name is on it, you still can't really trust it.
Right.
And then when you're changing filters, be very clean and very cautious. Don't introduce debris, you know.
Right.
Like often we'll have somebody that says, hey, I've got a no start or I've got some issue. It's like, well, what'd you do? What did you just do last?
Right. Yeah.
Oh, well, I just changed filters. Okay. Well, that you know, probably introduced something on accident. You know, it's easy to do.
Right.
And you're talking microscopic debris, so it's tough.
Awesome.
We don't want people to be scared of the systems because they are works of art and engineering marvels, honestly. But you got to take care of them.
Well, thank you, Luke and Carter. Your guys' knowledge is just phenomenal. I love learning about this. Everybody knows we'll talk about engines and stuff all the time, but something that is you know, the biggest factor for having a good life for your engine is doing your dang maintenance and changing the oil, but also your fuel system. We could build you $1 million diesel engine, but if your injector or pump or something like that is bad, you're gonna quickly have a bad engine and you're gonna melt it down. So these guys, thank you. Your knowledge has just been so appreciated and valuable. Please, everybody, hit us up in the comments, ask these guys questions. I think I'm pretty smart, but these guys are obviously way smarter than me. So bombard us with a bunch of questions. We'll answer them. We'll do our best to answer them, I should say. And you guys have been wonderful. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.